Oh boy, Paladins, everyone's favourite hand-me-down, is a first-person, objective-based hero shooter and Hi-Rez's second game that actually made them a profit. Being announced in September of 2015, Hi-Rez described their new title as a homage to more arena-styled shooting, being paired with abilities and their patented Hi-Rez twist, which was the card system. They also talked about their philosophy and getting their games into the hands of their players as soon as possible, and maybe releasing your games in an early, unfinished, and broken state isn't the best idea, but hey ho. The game was released in closed beta 2 months later, and while it did show some similarities to other games in the genre, there were also several elements that made it stand out. There were 8 characters to pick from, ranging from tanks to healers to DPS, each with basic attacks and 3 additional abilities. The objective of the game was to first capture a point, which would randomly spawn on 3 places of the map, then push a payload to the enemy's base to destroy it, all while the defenders are trying to wreck the cannon that spawned. Speaking of maps, these things were big. Like, look at this massive meat, that's a lot of space, so to move around quicker, the players could ride a horse at any time. Now onto that card system I mentioned earlier. In its first iteration, every time the player leveled up in a match, they would be able to choose one of 3 cards to apply to their character, such as additional health, status ailments such as burn being added to their weapons, increased ability effectiveness, all that good stuff. How you obtain these cards were through champion chests, which either use the in-game currency or real money. Yeah, unlocking the cards was random right now, which, yeah, did suck a little bit. The game in its first versions was not a perfect experience, no way of getting around that since it's so early in development. The points randomly spawning was probably the biggest issue right now, since where it would end up is obviously a guessing game, so the team had to spread out to predict the right one. Damage was also pretty low, so everyone felt a bit tanky, but overall it did show potential. They continued to refine the current systems for a while, patch 8 in particular, the patch that introduced Eevee, making it easier to level up players during a match so they could experience a full character build more often. This was alongside the introduction of legendary cards, which would not just improve an aspect of your character, but make an addition to them. Using Eevee as an example, her legendary cards included one adding a freeze effect to her blink ability, turning a defensive tool into an offensive one, or another spawning clones after a blink, adding more utility and trickery to her kit. It was a system that I really liked, since it did allow you to play the characters in a multitude of different ways. But anyways, the following patches continued to make small adjustments to find that sweet spot, including the capture point spawn times being reduced, in-match character leveling being limited to 5 levels, card rarities matching what level your character was when leveling up rather than being random, and champion masteries being introduced which would reward you with cards for said champion. Also legendary cards, although changing your character drastically, was the last card your character would receive, but the addition of specialty cards to pick at the start of a match would offer similarly large character changes, so players had to essentially pick their role at the start of a game and the end. Speaking of picking, a new mode called Constructed was added, where players were able to create a deck of cards that they could then choose from while leveling up in-game, rather than it being random like the separate casual game mode. Additions from here range from standard balance adjustments, the addition of new game modes like Capture the Point and Payload, additional maps to support these new modes, patches of grass that you could hide in to be stealthed, a respawn beacon stolen with love straight from Global Agenda to try and counter the long treks to the objectives, overall damage being increased, specialty cards being removed and turned into legendaries, reloading being added, oh yeah, and everyone getting an ultimate ability. These things really did change the pace of matches quite a bit from the war of attrition it was previously, since one good ult on the enemy team could quickly turn the tide of a match, Pip and Grok's ultimates in particular being big game changers. Okay, what happened next? Fernando went from amazing to useless like after every patch. Grover from Smite was added as a melee character, and he looks so out of place compared to the rest of the cast. Card deck construction was removed and replaced with a system where players would pick all 5 of their cards in the match lobby and level them up while playing. New maps, the addition of weapon skins, a Widowmaker, Kinessa, a sniper character was added and created an entire subsection of players who would never play the objective no matter what happened. Flying McCree Androxus was added, who gave a nice slice of vertical movement to the game. Ying was added, who dealt damage with clones of herself. Okay, that's a lot of changes, but what about the state of the game? Well, the card system gave way to many creative ways to build your character, which would change drastically over the course of the match. A personal favourite of mine was with Androxus when he was first released. I would use a card which would increase his air hover mobility, alongside a card which would elevate him whenever he fired his gun. So for the entire match, I would be flying as high as the game would allow me, picking off fools from below. It was absolute madness. I suppose the only problem right now was Snowball, since to make the cards better, you needed to level up, so to counteract this, the card system was completely changed again. Yay! This is pretty close to the system the game has today. Now players would have to construct a full deck of 5 cards before getting into a game, with all the cards being available in every rarity, but their effectiveness changing depending on how rare it was. To prevent players from building ultra powerful decks, however, there was a number limit tied to the card rarity, so players would have to pick their choices carefully. The only downside to this now is that a lot of the cards were watered down. That Androxus set I mentioned earlier was no longer possible, since your character could really only be unique in one aspect rather than several. Even then, that one aspect was usually just more damage after using an ability, or healing from a kill. The whole system became really bland and just improved your characters in arbitrary and boring ways. There was also a new system introduced called Burn Cards, a card with a special effect that you could buy with a currency that you earned within a match, stuff like additional damage to deployables or increasing the speed of your mount. It was basically an item shop before the actual item shop. Large changes to Siege were also made. Now players had to first capture the point, then push a payload to the goal to gain points, 4 in total being needed to win, rather than trying to destroy the enemy's base to end the game with a cannon. Rather than the war of attrition the game mode was before, it was changed so matches wouldn't go on for as long. Oh yeah, and Sky was nerfed again, that's a running trend. This patch was really the first where a portion of the community were actively against an update, and for good reason I'd say. Their game with creative freedom in character builds and strategic gameplay with their game mode were both now being simplified. I remember being upset myself. There was even a petition to revert the changes, but of course it went nowhere. Why did Hi-Rez decide to do this? Well, in the CB24 patch notes, they mentioned that they made the changes they did last patch to isolate and specify what champions do.
We had removed one of the specialty cards from most of the champions in the game and some of the supporting cards that went with that build in efforts to try and isolate and specify what champions do. We noticed there was a lot of clutter and lack of clarity when playing the game, and so players were complaining that they wouldn't understand exactly what a champion was doing when they were facing it. In attempts to remedy this, we decided to remove some of these specialty cards for certain characters and kind of hone in those specific builds. By doing so, we made sure that you had a clear identification of what build a character was going with. The feedback we received from this change was mostly that players felt that their personal experience when playing those characters wasn't as varied as it was before. In this patch, we're going to be adding back in additional specialty cards, one to start and see where we go from there, to make sure that characters have enough build varieties to make sure that you're having fun with that character and have enough options available to you. We'll also be adding in additional supporting cards for those builds to make sure there's some interplay between them. We will be maintaining the specialty card system to make sure that you are specifying a specific build, but also to solve a problem that we've had previously on the Paladins project, where you'd basically just pick a whole bunch of the strongest cards and make an optimal build.
So I guess they wanted a card system that affected character playstyles, but didn't want them to change their playstyles. Fantastic! Why the change in direction? Well, I'll talk about that later. For now, it's back to updates. Hi-Rez tried to appease the player base with additional cards to offer more quote-unquote playstyles, but they were never going to truly affect the way you played a character anymore, so I won't rag on about it. The game's design had simply changed to having builds focused around one or two of the champion's abilities and was never going to go back. So yeah, back to updates. Farah, sorry I don't care anymore, made a guest appearance dressed up as a dragon. They added the ability to buy each specific rarity of each card with the in-game currency. This was a really good change. That means it won't be around for very long. Burn cards were no longer lost on death and they were organised like the current day item shop, and that's basically what it was. Specialty cards were finally removed, some being added to the champion's base kits and others being taken out back. They also tried to change Cassie's default skin to the yellow variant rather than the green one for some reason, even in promo images and stuff. Just weird. Bomb King was added and... oh my goodness. Lord, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. Victor was added and he may look like a Soldier 76 ripoff, but he actually plays like he's from a standard FPS, so it's clear to me that he was half ripoff, half added to help ease people into the Paladins' ability-based gameplay. Honestly, a good addition. They also finally made the menu presentable and changed how the cards were purchased, so you only ever had to buy one version of a card, rather than having to buy each rarity of it. They finally added actual skins into the game. I'll talk more about this aspect later too. Makoa was added and he's oh lord. Okay, I'll talk about this now since the accusations of stealing from Overwatch were rampant around this time. Hi-Rez did not flat out steal characters from Blizzard, but what they do is take certain aspects of their characters and then build something else around that. Saying that they didn't do this is flat out lying to yourself. So why did they do this? Well, Overwatch is a popular game, that's why. Why would Hi-Rez risk making their title unique and potentially financially unviable when they can play it safe and make a free version of Overwatch? Don't believe me that this was their goal? Even after all the changes I've listed to the game's original mechanics to be more in line with the ones Overwatch has? Well, in CB30, they finally introduced a map which had one capture point and was much smaller in design. They finally killed off the last part of the game's original vision. Pretty much every OG Paladins player, including myself, was just done with the game at this point. No more large maps, no more unique character builds, no more cards which truly changed how abilities could be used, no more game modes that felt more like a war, and no more arena left in this shooter. It was just a poor man's Overwatch. Other than that, they finally renamed burn cards to the item shop, added a ranked game mode, that'll be fun to talk about later, added emotes, changed Buck's interesting shotgun into a not interesting shotgun, and changed Grover from a damage dealer to a support? And now he throws axes. I mean, the hitboxes for his swings before were pretty bad, so I get that. But what's his new ultimate?
Pass into the
Oh, come on! Open beta, we made it guys, was released on the 16th of September 2016, also on Steam. Oh my goodness. Yeah, turns out a free Overwatch would be a good competitor to Overwatch. Who would have guessed? Listen, I'm still mad that I lost a good game to this, but copying their competitors clearly worked out in Hi-Rez's favour, because Paladins was everywhere and everyone was playing it. In response, a tutorial was finally added a year after being released, but hey, better late than never I suppose, and they also released a new game mode called Payload, except it wasn't new. Even now, when Paladins was a clear public competitor to Overwatch, Hi-Rez didn't hesitate to show where their inspiration was coming from. The play of the game is where I draw the line. Why would you do this? Like, it's already a terrible feature that encourages risky plays so people can try and get an ego boost from Le Epic Game highlight. I don't see the point. Okay, enough with going over each update. Now Hi-Rez has the base of Paladins figured out, and we're now focusing on adding content and refining the game experience. So I'll move on to particularly large events that removed content and ruined the game experience. And in case you're wondering, no, I will not be covering the constant balance issues, technical problems, and player information issues that Paladins has, simply because I do not care about this game in the slightest and have zero interest in it anymore. So if you're looking for that stuff, a man called Helvian made 2 very in-depth videos talking about those topics in particular. I'm going to be talking about the decisions Hi-Rez have made. First, I want to talk about about this game's art direction, particularly where it decided to go over its development. Upon release, I think everyone can agree Hi-Rez were going for a sci-fi fantasy setting, so elves and the crystals used to power their weapons being tied with more futuristic technology. You can see this with Buck's old shotgun, Cassie's old bow, even her bird was a robot at one point, Ruckus's old design, Sky's Model 1 weapon, Barrick's and Evie's too. Grover's old axe may have not fit his appearance, but to me it was supposed to be the axe that was going to cut him down, since he's a tree. It was definitely there and was the direction at some point, and to be honest it's a pretty unique setting to choose. Off the top of my head I can't really think of another title using that mix, so it can make for some really interesting designs if built upon. Shame they didn't really do that. I started to get a bit worried when Bomb King was introduced since he's just a little bit out there, but Maldumba and the map redesigns is where the new theme became very obvious, Cassie's remodel being the nail in the coffin. Look, I'm not gonna say that the new art direction sucks and the old was better, it's just that sci-fi fantasy is way more unique than just fantasy, but I guess like the gameplay, the theme also had to be dumbed down for a wider audience. But hey, at least skins don't have to apply to this standard. Wow, skins don't apply to any standard, do they? Okay, let's ignore the fact that some skins change the model so drastically that they end up giving players advantages and disadvantages based on how much the enemy can actually see of them. I won't even talk about the busted sound design that's here too. Skins here follow the same monetization model that Smite does, so lots of chests and exclusive events to encourage you to spend money now. So slimy. Even worse is that they added battle passes down the line. Hey, keep playing our game and only our game in what little spare time you have, ha 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 ha. And the skins themselves, look, a lot of them are pretty cool, a lot are also very sexualized. Now, I'm not one for a lack of fan service in my media, I love Japanese games with a passion, but Hi-Rez really do like their form-fitting and skin-showing outfits for the female characters. Even on some default skins, Cassie's original design should be evidence enough. This stuff is honestly just preying upon poor, weak-willed, horny teenage boys who just want a lady to touch their sausage. I mean, look at some of these designs. Honestly, Maeve's demon skin is where it goes too far. Here's a character that is clearly intended to be underage, and yet Hi-Rez insists she's 18 and give her this skin. I've already brought up the argument for Smite, where the characters are deities and thus should be depicted as perfect males and females, but for Paladins, look, the revealing and fetishistic skins are just a predatory business practice to squeeze money from you and your desires, and that's just uncomfortable. So what else can you spend your money on? Well, there are voice packs for the VGS system, ripped straight from Smite, ripped straight from Tribes Ascend, and sprays because hey, we aren't Overwatch enough yet. Weapon skins, announcer packs, emotes, mounts, death stamps because they were such a good idea in Smite, loading frames, music packs, titles, like when does it end? Are we going to get different purchasable pause menus next? What about buying different keybind packs? Why not sell the entire settings menu separately? At this point, Paladins is the most customizable experience since Bionicle, so why not? Don't know why they don't try and sell game mechanics at this point. Hey, maybe the card system could make them some decent dosh, but that would really upset the player base. They wouldn't do that. Right? Okay. Let's just ignore the fact that this patch was the equivalent of the Chernobog patch from Smite, as in the game was not functional when the update was released. Let's also ignore the outcries from the community while the patch was on the test server that this was a very, very bad idea. OB44 decided to change the card system slightly, firstly with the addition of legendary cards, a special character-specific card that you would pick at the beginning of a match to greatly alter and quote-unquote improve one aspect of your character. This came alongside a multitude of additional ability effects being removed and turned into legendary cards. So now instead of characters having useful abilities, they could now choose one ability to be acceptable and the rest left as mediocre. But how were these new legendary cards and retrofitted old cards obtained? Well, that would be through spending gold to open Radiant chests, which would give you random cards, and if you were lucky, you would get the one you want. Don't worry if you get duplicates, because if you do then you'll get a new currency called Essence, which is used to craft cards. The problem? Everything costed way too much to craft. Legendary cards cost 18,000 Essence to craft. To give some perspective, you only got 36,000 for doing the tutorial. That's only 2 legendary cards. Each character has 3. This isn't even including the standard cards you now had to craft or unlock in their RNG chests as well. In one patch, Hi-Rez turned the game from an Overwatch clone to a Hearthstone clone. The grind to unlock all these new cards was so intense, so amazingly unrealistic to expect players to just sit back and farm away, that a full backlash was in order for the change to be reverted. I cannot even begin to express how bad the game experience became because of this change. New players couldn't make a build and were now expected to play for countless hours before they can actually use the system, which apparently makes it unique from Overwatch, and old players now had to sink all their hard-earned resources on buying everything again and still not having enough. Add in a dash of density from the employees, since hey, they don't have to worry about any of these problems since they're devs, and this was a patch that would go down in the history books as the day that Hi-Rez nearly killed Paladins. Jeez, how can it get any worse? I mean, the game is still bug-ridden at this point. Balance is clearly being performed by sea monkeys, and plain stupid decisions, such as auto-aim abilities being added into this first-person shooter, so console players and people with an IQ that matches their shoe size can still have fun, Leon being the biggest example of console pandering I've ever seen. Oh yeah, the game was also available on Xbox One and PS4 around this time, and no, they did not balance the platforms separately, because of course they didn't. Oh god, I'm starting to lose hope. How can it get any worse? The 7th of December 2017, the day OB64 went on the playable test server. Man, what an update. What a complete lack of awareness of your community. What a blatant attempt to steal money from your player base. I have honestly never seen tunnel vision as bad as this update, and the entire free movie saga that could be made from it. Let's start with the 2 good things this update added. Essence was removed. Yay! All the cards were now available for free. Yay! There is now a card leveling system. No! Okay, so instead of players being able to make a deck of cards and adjust their rarities like before, now cards had levels, and you had to get multiple duplicates of that specific card to level it up to make it more powerful, including legendary cards. How did you get these duplicates? Loot boxes, oh no. The backlash was immediate, and it was enormous. I don't think I've seen a community truly all band together to fight back against the decision of the developers as much as a Paladins community did at this point, desperately giving feedback on how the changes would kill the game, suggesting compromises, begging the whole system to just be dropped, even poorly made artwork being spammed as a form of protest. They were doing everything they could to stop Paladins from becoming Battlefront 2. Other features of this patch include all casual game modes being wrapped into one quick play queue, and cards in ranked being set to level 3 by default. So if you wanted a fair experience that wasn't pay to win, you would have to play competitive, and no one liked the absolutely trash matchmaking system, and adding a bunch of new players would only dilute the player pool even more. I do not see this as a suitable compromise. What all this protesting resulted in was the PTS version of the patch being updated several times, and its official release being delayed as well. But honestly, every update they made to the patch just seemed to make it worse and worse. Update 3 didn't follow that latter line, however. It reduced the number of duplicates needed to level up cards, but that still didn't fix the balance issues that would be caused by having a full deck of level 5 cards, or the horrific grind you would need to participate in if you didn't pay up. Update 4, on the other hand, oh my god, we remain committed to Cards Unbound and its core mechanic, despite those core mechanics being what everyone had a problem with. Like, I don't get it. Take the loss and cancel the update. Stop trying to make it happen because the community clearly hate this patch and you, Hi-Rez, with a passion, to the point where some people are just flat out quitting the game since they're gonna kill it anyways. Update 5 decided to raise the card level from 5 to 10, I honestly have no clue how Hi-Rez thought this decision could have possibly resulted in anything but negative feedback, but I really do think they were just trying to kill the game at this point. Update 6 added a separate casual queue similar to Ranked, where all cards would be set to level 4 by default. Still doesn't fix the problem, but instead just sections it off like a biological hazard by limiting all the cards to a static level. Every card is not at its best or worse, so character building is more stale and even more meaningless than it already is. Updates 7 and 8 were just damage control and minor fixes. I guess Hi-Rez had already altered the system as much as they were willing to and just wanted it out there. I'm pretty sure the PTS period took about 4 weeks for a single patch. Like, that's madness. So yeah, the patch was released and everyone hated it more than anything ever, and the player base tanked. We're talking a drop of around 10,000 players who all said, "I cannot believe you've done this," and this resulted in longer queues for all the game modes, which meant you couldn't actually play the game. And no, Hi-Rez, unlockable lore was not going to make it all better and bring back the community. Seriously, who even cares about the Paladins story? But even though this update showed Hi-Rez's true colours to all the virgins who never played their old games, there was still one good side, and that would be the utter hilarity that came from OB64. When you had a full deck of level 10 cards, the game would become so unbelievably broken that you were probably dying from laughter as much as you were dying in game. We're talking stuff like Buck being able to jump so high that he hits the ceiling boundary, Strix being able to one-shot body-shot anyone, Inara spamming walls everywhere, Fernando DPS was finally back and it's the funniest thing I've ever seen. This update was honestly like the spirit of old Paladins came back to punish players, on Christmas of all things, and I couldn't be laughing any harder. So what happened next? Well, in late February, early March, OB67 announced the removal of Cards Unbound and reverted the card system back to how it was before. Everyone started praising Hi-Rez because they're deluded enough to think that they made the change due to player backlash rather than because they were losing money. Like, are you guys just dumb? Or do you just really want to believe that was the reason so you don't lose all hope? Complaining has never worked with any other change in any of their other games. Why do you think you're an exception? So what happened after this? Well, to recoup on costs, they added the event monetization model from Smite and, Holy Mary, Mother of Joseph. These events would be repeated to the current day and act as the main way to entice players to buy skins, otherwise they'd be missing out. They also usually come with other rewards that everyone can earn with points earned during the event lifecycle, stuff like emotes. It never stops. The main menu was also redesigned to this. Why? Because Overwatch! Seriously, at this point the two games are interchangeable with each other. Don't try and act like the card system in Paladins makes it distinctive when the improvements are so minuscule and unimportant. Stuff like knockback effectiveness and lower cooldowns. Oh boy, it's deeper than Saints Row 3. You only have a one deck to use in all situations pretty much, bar replacing extra damage to shields to anti-heal ones depending on the enemy team comp. Only legendary cards affect your character and most of them do the same thing, which is give you more damage, but that's only for the characters who have more than one viable legendary card they can pick from anyways. Why on earth would you even bother comparing Paladins to Overwatch? They are the same game, except the developers on one abuse the community and the developers on the other abuse the community. Oh wait! Okay, so what's happening next? Well, the game was officially released. What? Yes, OB70 was Paladins 1.0. The beta sticker would finally be peeled off, and... Okay, let's not beat around the bush. The game was obviously not ready for an official release. I won't even mention the bugs, even though they outnumber the player count. Aspects of the game are still incomplete. Stuff like champions and skins not having loading art, and not everything being updated to reflect the new art direction. What I'm saying is that the game's official release still looks like it was in beta, and Hi-Rez must have agreed because the Paladins logo still had the beta stamp on it when the update dropped. A minor oversight. but a hilarious one. So even though it was clear that the game wasn't ready, why did they fully release it? Two possibilities, the second being more likely. First would be Tencent pushing for it to finally happen, and the second being a little console called the Nintendo Switch. The Switch eShop doesn't allow titles in alpha or beta in its store, however, and it's obviously a very large market that didn't have a title like Paladins at the time, especially not a free one. So yeah, no-brainer for Hi-Rez, get it out of beta, put it on the Switch, get some free cash. And if you still don't believe me, data mining the release patch revealed some Nintendo-related files, so something was clearly in the pipeline for it, and lo and behold, I was right, what a surprise. Speaking of the Switch, what is the state of Paladins on console? About the same as it on PC, honestly. Worst thing about the console version though would be the aim assist. I don't know what possessed the employee who developed this feature because the creature that spawned from it is way too powerful. The aim assist assists you too much, so hit scan characters such as Victor, Leon, Vivian, Talius just dominate every match. Doesn't help that all those characters are DPS as well. Worst part about this isn't the constant rectal ravaging that console players receive from the overly ambitious auto-aim. It's the fact that because of this, the game is harder to balance because a buff to any of the characters I mentioned earlier would completely destroy competitive on those platforms more than it already is. How do we fix this problem? Nuke the auto-aim from orbit and don't look back. Ah, Christ, what a mess. This whole game is a mess. Like, I've been talking for God knows how long, and I've barely scratched the surface of how many problems this game has, and still has to this day. I haven't even mentioned all the balance issues, got into specifics about the countless number of technical issues. I haven't even mentioned the player experience much either. Reason why is because of Helvian's 2 videos focusing on these topics that I mentioned at the start. I also haven't mentioned the number of events that happen outside the game, like the Assembly of Champions and you being able to vote for complete jokes of entries. Also the drama with an ex-Hi-Rez employee entering when it was against the rules of the event, and Hi-Rez making all the excuses in the book to make her stay. I haven't mentioned how the verification badge, a system where players would get a check mark next to their name to prevent impersonation, accidentally revealed how petty Hi-Rez are when it comes to criticism, as a Paladins YouTuber and critic called Cyberbolt was mocked by Hi-Rez employees while trying to get one and was called toxic by the lead developer. Speaking of employees, I haven't mentioned how amazingly immature they have acted over the years, and how they respond to some people in particular. Seriously, they act like the Manson family. Okay, I'm done with this section now. I don't want to talk about this cash-grabbing plagiarism anymore. If you're neck-deep in Paladins with all that time and money you've spent by now, the only thing I can say is to accept that you went through the Hi-Rez cycle and move on. There really is no replacement for this game right now apart from Overwatch, so I would recommend something else entirely. Maybe a fighting game. Why not try Dead or Alive 6? It's free and has waifus in it, so I'm sure you'll love it.